Next, from Springfield, we head to a committee hearing on SB 1657, the Gun Dealer Licensing Act. We'll hear from two opponents of the bill, Dan Eldridge, the owner of Maxson Shooter Supplies in Des Plaines, and Todd Vandermeide, a lobbyist with the NRA of Illinois, who say the bill will not hold criminals accountable, but will rather drive small businesses into bankruptcy due to increasing regulations. This runs about 40 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for inviting me to speak. My name is Dan Eldridge. I am the owner of Maxson Shooters and the author of that Tribune op-ed that I think was probably widely circulated. In the next 5-ish minutes, I'll tell you a little bit about our business, walk you through how we purchase, account for, and store firearms, attempt to correct some of the misinformation that's been presented by proponents of the bill, and quickly point out why this bill is so toxic to the small businesses. Maxson's is a 30-year-old small business in Des Plaines. I'm the third owner. We employ 30 people with very low turnover. In 3 years, I've lost one employee whose slot came up in the Chicago Police Department Academy. He's now a police officer in Chicago. We collect and remit more than $500,000 in property, sales, and other taxes every year to the state, city, and county. We educate more than 10,000 customers a year in safety classes, emergency medical trauma, concealed carry, and other firearm safety issues. When we buy a new firearm, when it's acquired by us, it's received into our inventory system by serial number. Every firearm has a name on it in the sense that it's serialized. It's not a big box of crayons, it's an individual item in our inventory. Each firearm is entered into our acquisitions dispositions log as required by the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobaccos, and Firearms. They're stored securely in our shop, and we know where every firearm is at all times. There's no shrinkage, and guns aren't stacked up like cordwood, ready to be pilfered. When a customer wishes to see a firearm, the first question is, may I see your concealed carry or FOID card? No one may touch a firearm without these credentials. Before anything comes out of the case, we check their date of birth, and we check the expiration date of those credentials, because in Cook County, where we are, all firearms are 21 years minimum. When the customer decides to make a purchase, we photocopy the state ID and the FOID, or concealed carry license. The customer fills out a Form 4473. We cannot alter, assist, or coach them in any way through this. The customer signs and dates the 4473. We run a background check through the Illinois State Police portal. The background check is either immediately approved, delayed, or denied. Delays can be because the system is busy, a similar last name and date of birth combination, or any number of other reasons. Mandatory waiting periods in Illinois, 72 hours for handguns, 24 hours for long guns. No release of firearms before the approval or the waiting period has elapsed. That is against the law. At pickup, we recheck the FOID or concealed carry. Is it still valid? We retain the 4473 with the customer's purchase receipt for the life of the business. So I'm not sure what these loopholes are that the anti-gun rights people keep talking about. There aren't any that I'm aware of. It is a crime for a customer to lie on the 4473. It's called out in the instructions. Among the instructions, are you purchasing this firearm for another individual? If they check yes, that's the end of that application. If they check no, and indeed they are buying for another individual, they are committing a felony. It's illegal for us to transfer a firearm without a 4473. That's federal law. It's illegal for us to fail to conduct an Illinois State Police background check. That's Illinois law. It is illegal for us to release a firearm before the waiting period has elapsed. That's Illinois law. And it's illegal for us to release a firearm after a denied background check. We are regulated by Illinois law. Firearms are not transferred to us, by us to unqualified buyers unless the buyer is feloniously lying, period. The gentleman from the ATF identified resource issues at the ATF. That is a federal problem. That is a federal question for your representatives in Washington. I want to tell you what an ATF audit is like. For a shop of my size, it involves at least a week and 5 ATF agents plus 3 of my staff. Every gun is accounted for. Every transfer, every sale is checked against our acquisitions dispositions log. That's a full week for a single shop, 5 inspectors. But they don't audit very often. Well, we can be audited at any time without notice. If we are found in violation, I risk massive fines. I risk the closure or loss of my business, losses of millions of dollars of investment. Being under the threat of an unannounced inspection is the appropriate way to do this. I will not operate my business in such a way that I am risking it through sloppy work. So why is this bill so toxic to a small business? I'll let Mr. Vandermeide testify as to the gross lawmaking defects of this act, but at a high level, there are no limits on the license fees, and I believe they're many times higher than the current estimates that have been discussed here today. There are no limits on training requirements. Suppose an anti-gun board decided that we need 10 hours per week per employee of training. That would put me out of business. There are no limits on security. And while I appreciate the kind words from the previous witness about the security at our shop, there is no one-size-fits-all security that's appropriate. I operate in an urban area, very fast police response times, very different security requirements from somebody who's out on a state highway somewhere with a sheriff's deputy patrolling 20 square miles. So one-size-fits-all security is simply a mistake. Employee vetting. Every employee at my shop has a concealed carry license or FOID. There's only one who does not have the concealed carry license. That is a background check. These are not criminals. Other toxic pieces of this legislation are this to-be-determined board that can shut me down for reasons of public safety. We don't know what those might be, and on and on. Yet you've exempted the big boxes from this burden. Big box stores, low-wage, high-turnover employees. They are not solely involved in firearms sales. In what world is the Walmart carve-out consistent with the stated goal of this act? Now back to straw purchases and other illegal firearms acquisitions. The infographics that the bill's proponents are circulating are largely based on a Johns Hopkins study. What they don't mention from this is in the second paragraph of the introduction, and I'll quote, "Although perpetrators of gun violence are commonly proscribed from possessing a firearm, many obtain firearms through an illegal market or theft. Surveys of incarcerated offenders indicate that most armed criminals obtain their firearms directly from a friend, family member, or on the street." That's in the opening of that Johns Hopkins study. They're saying gun shops are not the problem. And from Representative Mitchell's alma mater, the University of Chicago study that keeps getting tossed around here. And hopefully my sons. They conclude that sources of guns to dangerous people, the study is sources of guns for dangerous people, what we learned by asking them. Interviewed 99 Cook County inmates who were in possession of 135 firearms. How many purchased from a legal FFL? 2. 2 of 135 firearms were obtained from an FFL. All the bad behavior, straw purchases, illegal private sales, thefts, etc., is illegal. Gun shops are accountable. We do not violate federal or state law, and the state police can and do run stings to make certain that shops are in compliance. But I'll close with a recent episode that highlights the limp effort by Cook County prosecutors and judges to deal aggressively with the atrocious level of violence in Chicago. A young Mount Prospect woman with a valid FOID card purchased and transferred 4 firearms to non-FOID holders and ultimately juvenile offenders. The Chicago Police Department worked diligently with ATF to build a straw buyer case. This is hard work. The prosecutor cut a deal and the judge approved it. 4 felonies for firearms trafficking, probation, and a $600 fine. This is an admitted trafficker, probation. Please let us conduct our lawful business with our law-abiding customers and focus on enforcement of the existing laws, prosecute the real criminals. Stop wasting scarce law enforcement and other governmental resources in such a way that harass legal businesses and their customers, but does nothing to stop crime. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Todd Vandermont on behalf of the National Rifle Association. We stand here, the gun owners represented via the Illinois State Rifle Association, the NRA, Illinois Carry, Gun Saves Lives, and other groups. We stand here with the manufacturers of the state of Illinois and the gun dealers of the state of Illinois, and we are all opposed to this bill. Let me walk you through some of the things. Despite what people have said, this is about running people out of business. They expect to see smaller dealers go out and not want to contend with this. This is about drawing down the number of FFLs in the state. As you look at the licensing scheme, there's a licensing scheme for dealers. Those are individuals. There's a licensing scheme for dealerships. Those are corporations. If you're an officer of the corporation, you have to have a dealer's license. So you've got 2 licenses there, potentially more depending on if they're going to require every officer of the corporation to have a dealer's license under this thing. You then have an agent's, I don't know if they're going to issue a new kind of FOID card or something, but every person who works behind the counter at a gun store now becomes a dealer agent and is subject to this new oversight. Then you have to have a person in charge that's going to be vetted by the DPR. They can do personal interviews. DFPR now essentially becomes the HR department for a local gun store. They get to say who can be your person in charge. They mandate these tests, these other things that go on, and it's just like, okay, you just can't hire a veteran. You now have to deal with the DPR. This $5,000 license. So if you were to take the license and make it run concurrently with a 3-year typical 01 FFL, there are 2,200 01 and 02 type FFLs. 01s are dealers, 02s are pawnbrokers. There are approximately 200 of those are big box stores, which are exempt from those. You then have auctioneers, which are now exempt. So Rock Island Auctions, one of the largest firearm auction houses in the country, that tens of thousands of guns go through their doors, would be exempt by this. So if you take the natural attrition that we believe will occur, you'll easily be down to 1,500 FFLs. 1,500 into $6 million, roughly $5,000, $5,100 for a 3-year license, $1,700 a year. That will probably drive even more FFLs out of business. And if you're not going to charge the $5,000, then what social service agency, what other line item in the budget do you want to take $6 million from? Or whatever portion of it is that you're not going to fund. Because the $5,000 to $5,100 just gets you, if you're trying to make this revenue neutral, if the department's accounts are accurate in their projections. They have a mandatory apprenticeship type program if you want to become a new FFL under this bill. So think about this. SEAL Team 6, the guys that took down Osama bin Laden, not one of those members after this bill passes could come to Illinois and open up a gun store and range because they haven't done a year's service at another licensee. If you were a Marine Corps armorer building sniper rifles in Quantico, Virginia, for the Scout Sniper teams, one of the most elite sniper crews in any military service, you could not come out, open a gun store, and be a gunsmith on your own without finding some other gun dealer who's going to give you a year's worth of apprentice knowing that you're going to go out to compete with him. That is how nonsensical this bill is. This is anti-veteran. They are allowed at unlimited rules. Well, you can laugh at it, Representative, but I find it that when those guys, our upper end echelon of the military, can't even come out and are qualified, I legitimately say this is anti-veteran. And so you have unlimited rules. They can write rules for the vast majority of the act just for record keeping and enforceability. Okay, so could they require an Illinois 4473, double up on the paperwork, so now you have twice the number of opportunities to make a paperwork clerical error that is punishable by a $10,000 fine? We've seen municipalities try to force gun dealers to turn over their records monthly, quarterly, or something like that. Is DFPR now going to, under a hostile administration, try to force a registration scheme that has been written in the previous versions of this bill? Security. Well, what if we do the Chicago way, where, you know, there's only one security company as an alarm company that really fits the bill for this, and you're going to have to go use these guys? I was at a gun store last week where we had an impromptu meeting about this. He was pointing out he spent over $100,000 on display cases. A lot of the modern gun stores, stores like Maxon's here, try to put a lot of effort into security. There is no one size fits all. But what if that becomes a $100,000 mandate on every FFL in the state? You sit there, you know, videotaping all transfers. I didn't know that exercising a fundamental constitutional right gets me treated like a sex offender because I go to the counter and plop down at least 2 IDs that show that I've been background checked previously by the state police. Big box guys are out. I think you guys have heard enough about that. Some 07s are out. It's interesting that they say that if you hold an 07 manufacturer's license currently, you're out. But if Maxon's were to build and build and grow and decided that they wanted to offer their own line of firearms, AR-15s, and they wanted to become an 07 manufacturer, they still fall in under this bill. Well, either 07s are out or they're in, and this bill does nothing but confuse that. We've heard about trace data. 40% of firearms are traced back to dealers. That's at an initial point of sale. That's not that it went directly from the gun counter to the street and was used in a crime. The average time to crime on Illinois firearms is averaging 13 years, well above the national average. And so these trace numbers, firearms get traced for a number of reasons. If there's a suicide and there's a gun involved, chances are the police department's gonna trace the firearm. If the firearm is picked up at a crime scene and it's traced and it gets traced back to a gun store, doesn't mean the gun store did anything wrong. What if that firearm was actually part of a burglary? If they break into my house and they steal a large quantity of firearms, the gun dealer didn't do anything wrong. But the trace counts against it. And what the proponents of this bill have tried to do is they have tried to equate traces to criminal culpability. And it's just not there. They don't account for how the gun ended up there. All they can do is say it came out of this store potentially in the beginning. They don't identify whether or not it was from a break-in, straw sale, or anything else. One of the studies that's been quoted, and I'll quote from it, controlling for local gun ownership reduces the estimated effect of regulating private handgun sales and a strong gun dealer oversight such that the effects of the latter is no longer statistically significant. This is about weaponizing a state agency against small businesses that there's an industry that certain people in the state don't like. They have tried to sue them out of business. They have tried to run stings to put them out of business, which have failed. They have tried to do it. They've tried protests outside their doors for running a perfectly legal business. And after all those events have failed, they've tried to come here now to turn the very state. I didn't know that we were so flourished with businesses that we could just take hundreds of businesses and summarily run them out. I guess our state's budget is just so flush with cash, we don't need them. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Before we go to questions, Representative Nekritz moves do pass on Senate Bill 1657, which is to open the roll, and votes aye. Representative Gazzardi votes aye. Representative Reich.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious about tracing guns. Gun at a crime scene is traced. As part of your federal firearms license, you said that you are involved in or required to inventory every serial number, every gun. And let's say a gun is bought at your place and is found someplace up in McHenry County as part of as being the weapon involved in a crime scene. The trace reports. Explain to me how a trace report works and how it gets back to you.
Okay. Police recover a gun. It could be recovered in a stolen car. It could be recovered from a suicide. It could be recovered from a crime scene, or it could be recovered with other burglarized property. Local police contacts ATF and says, we have this gun with this serial number on it. We'd like to run a trace. ATF contacts the manufacturer, provides them with the serial number. Manufacturer tells them this firearm went to XYZ distributor. ATF goes to XYZ distributor, says, where did you sell this gun? They say, we sold it to ABC Gun Shop. ATF goes to ABC Gun Shop, says, to whom did you sell this firearm? We say John Q. Public or Jane Q. Public. At that point, the ATF can provide that information to local law enforcement. Local law enforcement can pursue it as far down the chain as they like, because the private sales should be running the background checks as well.
Okay. Is there a definition of something called a crime gun? What is a crime gun?
I believe it's a term of art for the proponents of this bill.
You know what that means?
I think they use it in a very loose way, that any firearm that comes into the hands of of a law enforcement agency becomes a crime gun. Now understand, that could become from a CCL holder who makes a mistake and carries inappropriately. It could be because it was picked up in at a crime scene per se. It could come from a suicide. There's no real definition of that, and so when they start talking about crime guns, nobody ever puts a definition into it to quantify. And that's why the trace data is so misleading.
So it could be a gun just somebody finds laying on the side of the road, just got thrown out of a car.
Representative Wright, pardon me 1 second. Representative Cassidy votes aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Where was I going with this? So a gun that basically somebody just finds out in the woods, somebody dropped, could be a crime gun under this bill. Is that what you're saying?
Presumably, yes.
This bill doesn't define what a crime gun is, but I would say a gun just found and turned into law enforcement does not constitute a crime gun.
But it could, because it's not defined.
That's not what this bill does. Not address crime guns. It addresses gun dealer licensing. That's what this bill does. It has absolutely nothing to do.
But it does impose a certain accountability to the gun shop owner when a gun is found at a location where a crime may have been committed or no crime may have been committed at all. Is that what I'm hearing here?
I guess I don't quite understand. If no crime is committed and a gun is just found, it is not defined as a crime gun. If a crime is committed,
I beg to differ, because since you don't have a definition of the term, you can make it be whatever you want it to be.
but in all due respect, that's irrelevant to what this bill is doing. This bill is going for gun dealer licensing.
Because under the inspections, they can have unlimited inspections for good cause. Now, if the board wants to adopt the rules that any gun shop that has 2 or more guns traced to it becomes a good cause for a new inspection, and the opponents have talked about, or the proponents have talked about the number of traces to certain gun shops that happen within Illinois, as these are the bad apple dealers. Yet they have no criminal evidence to. One of those gun dealers just went through an inspection in November. 10 ATF agents showed up unannounced and stayed there for 3 weeks. No criminal penalties, no major discrepancies, no missing firearms. But they want to use the trace data to point the finger at FFLs and say, these are bad people, yet they have no evidence of that. All they have is, and if you take the trace data and you use that as the basis for inspections and everything else, then yes, there's a problem because there's no definition in there.
Okay, let me clarify a couple of quick things for you, Representative. Traces do not count against a federal licensed dealer. A A crime gun is defined by the local tracing agency. So a gun is a crime gun if a police agency states that it is so. Also, I have been informed that ATF does not do unannounced inspections. They will always announce an inspection.
Okay. Well, we have direct testimony to the contrary on that. But what was that second point that the point you made beforehand?
About the a crime gun is defined by the local tracing agency, and a gun is a crime gun if the police agency states that it is so.
Then why isn't it in this bill? Why are we?
Because as I clarified to you before, this bill has absolutely nothing to do with the definition of a crime gun. It has to do with the requirement of having gun dealers have a state license.
But one leads to the other, because if you don't have a definition of crime gun and you trace back to a dealer several times, and that dealer is subject to random search and audit of their stuff, sooner or later that gun shop is going to suffer a certain penalty, and that penalty may be the point of driving them out of business. What are the federal rules with regard to how many passes do you get on crime guns being traced back to your gun shop before you are either told to be out of business, or you are told or you're run out of business, or whatever?
Well, I would say that currently there is one shop that has 1,500 guns, and if you want to use crime gun as a definition, trace back to them, and they are still not shut down under the federal guidelines.
It depends on the nature of the reason for the traces. Can the gun dealer account for the guns? Can the gun dealer show the 4473? Can the gun dealer? 65% of the traces she just alluded to are over 3 years. The guns are over 3 years old. ATF generally considers a 3-year time to crime line as being, something that piques their interest. So the question becomes, if you're a gun dealer and you sell a firearm and it's traced back to you 10 years later, but how many hands has it gone through? At what time do you quit being liable or culpable because it's changed hands?
Well, and I think, with due respect, and I don't mean to cut you off, Todd, but I think I clarified that where I said just because a trace doesn't necessarily mean that your FFL is going to be revoked or anything like that.
Under the federal law, that's true. Under the law you're proposing, that could absolutely be a basis to take somebody's state license away.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for testifying. So a couple things. First of all, it was stated by my dear friend Todd that this bill would be considered anti-veteran. I actually want to make a distinction here. I think that the ability, I'm not even going to use a SEAL Team 6 example because I think that's a little far afield, but we might recall a political ad earlier this season from a Democrat, Jason Kander, who assembled a gun as part of to demonstrate his stance on gun ownership. And I think it's great that he can do that. I think it's important, and I'm grateful for his service to the country. I would also say that he could go work for Smith & Wesson or something like that, and I think that job would be really good for him. That said, there is a distinction between assembling weapons for the scout team snipers and being involved in commercial trade. That is a fundamentally different practice. And so, yes, I think that that person should do some apprenticing because commercial practice in using weapons is different than building those weapons for military use. That is a distinction that I think needs to be made. So let's just start there. Let me ask a couple more questions. So first of all, we talked about potentially putting, I want to actually start with a data question, which is, you said, I'm going to call you Todd, I hope you don't mind, I'd be Mr. Vandermeer otherwise, which is just long. But you said it was average, 13 years was the average sort of time to crime, but Mr. Eldridge's article says 9, so which is it? Is it 9 or 13? It's the average time to crime on a crime gun in Illinois.
The last one I saw was 13. So if Dan underestimated
I'm looking at an article from May 10th, 2017 from the Tribune, so I just want to make sure we're all sort of dealing in truth, and it says that the average time to crime is 9 years. So you don't have to answer that now, potentially, but just as we're
I'll dig it up for you. I'll dig you up the site.
I appreciate it. You're just criticizing proponent data, so I just want to make sure everyone's data has the same integrity. So a couple more questions. So my understanding is that, so we noted a potential licensure of $5,500 or something like that. What is the average revenue for the average gun store in Illinois? Give me sort of small, medium, large, give me average, what do we know?
I don't know how to quantify that because you have X number of guys that do gun shows don't have brick and mortar stores. You have brick and mortar stores like Dan's here and others, and they, you know, there's law weapons in Naperville. It has a very small retail storefront. Then you have places like Dan's that have tens of thousands of square footage. Some have ranges, some don't. I don't know.
I think that would be helpful data for this committee as well as for the broader body, because on the one hand, while we're talking about sort of potentially putting business out of business, I've got literal dead bodies on one side, and on the other side, I've got the hypothetical that potentially a industry that saw a 158% increase in sales under President Obama for the guns he was allegedly going to take away on the other side. If you're not making enough to offset a $5,500 license selling guns in America, maybe you might want to try something else, or perhaps you needed more training. That would just be my personal opinion on it. A couple more things. Mr. Eldridge, you said that 2 of 135 weapons in an interview, I think, of Cook County prisoners were legally obtained. How were the other 133 of those attained?
Largely through social networks.
Okay, but so help me. So I know, for example, with methamphetamine, you can sort of produce that in your basement. You can actually sort of use synthetic materials and actually create meth. Is there a way to fabricate the creation of a weapon? Like, can you build a firearm out of metal in your basement?
In theory you can.
Okay,
but the practical reality of what you're getting to is, how did that gun get to? Somebody broke the law at some point.
Somebody broke the law at some point, but is it fair to say that at some point that gun came through an FFL?
Yes, and that gun at some point came from a manufacturer.
Absolutely. I'm not disagreeing with that, but I am saying that this idea that somehow, because we've got guns ending up next to the bodies of dead kids, whether it's in Chicago or, believe it or not, there is violence in other places in the state, just to sort of cue in my fellow colleagues, right? Around the state, violence happens. It is clear that that gun is coming from, at some point, an FFL and a manufacturer. My broader point to this gentleman is, let me speak for myself, but I think I can speak more broadly for other Democratic members of the committee, because I think this bill is going to go on partisan lines. Nobody wants your guns, right? I learned to shoot a .22 when I was 9 years old. I'm not a very good shot anymore, but at some point, you know, Todd and I are going to go pheasant hunting, I think, so we can fix that. And nobody wants your guns. But the challenge is, we've got a defanged ATF, right? As we've sort of heard throughout the testimony, 6.3% of dealers are actually getting sort of regulated at this point. And I've got, and by the way, another thing that Todd can tell you is that I actually came to see a gun shop run, right? Actually spent time behind the counter with a guy who's got a pretty good reputation as a gun dealer. Obviously, proponents might disagree with that. Here is my challenge. I understand that this person might be doing things the right way, but I also understand that, for better or for worse, guns from that shop are still ending up next to the bodies of kids. And ultimately, we have to do something, and most of the experts say this would actually be helpful. But nobody wants to take guns or put legal gun owners out of business. The challenge is, when you talk about building cases, when you talk about doing trafficking cases, because we don't have any sort of floor for what the standard is for dealers, you can't get the video evidence you need. You can't get the inventory evidence you need, because there is no standard for what every dealer must have. And the challenge is, in my community and other communities, you literally have kids ending up dead as a result. Now, that's not because you're in business saying, hey, I don't really care where my guns go, and kids ending up dead is a sort of a side effect. You're not saying that. I don't believe you're that kind of person, or that Todd or the NRA or anybody else is like that. But the effect is the same. And so if we were having a conversation about how to make this bill better, and ultimately we are fine with licensure, but, you know, here are the things that we need to be okay with it, it's a different conversation. But the bottom line is, the people who don't like this bill are never coming home. And if we don't have something like this, and the ATF continues to be defanged and continues to be funded at a 1972 level, we're going to stay here having this problem. So I think that ultimately, this is a flawed, there's no question this is a flawed process, but it's a good bill. And if there are more suggestions for how to make it better, I think everyone's open to that. But the truth is, we could fix the Walmart problem, and everyone at this table is still opposed, unless I'm wrong about that. And if I am, please tell me.
Oh, the open-ended nature of this bill is what's so toxic to a small business. It's a framework upon which anything can be hung, and that's a huge problem.
So, Mr. Eldridge, respectfully, what would you suggest specifically? What's a better way to do this type of regulation?
Well, I think the better, vigorous prosecution of straw purchasers and traffickers, attack the criminals where they are. To
Mr.
go
Eldridge,
after
respectfully, when you talk about that, the federal standard, as I understand, in terms of straw purchasing, especially at the dealer level, and we've acknowledged in this testimony that that's where guns at least start, is known or should have known that it was going to be used for a purchase. That's an incredibly high standard. Now, if you're saying that the NRA here and nationally is going to support a change to that standard, that's a very different conversation, but I doubt that's going to happen.
I'm not referring to the gun shop. I'm referring to the person who comes in with a FOID card, who passes an Illinois State Police background check and wishes to buy a gun. He or she comes in by themselves. I have to sell them that weapon. I cannot profile people. I cannot deny a sale based upon their membership in a protected class. There are laws against that.
So so let's pause right there. So help me at that point. What other tools could we give you to not, if you've got a feeling in your gut or a feeling from experience or from some factors you could identify that this person needs to not get the weapon you're about to have to sell them, what could we do to make it so that you could stop that? What do those factors look like?
I don't know, because I can't control prosecution for bias crimes.
But that's not the question I'm asking you, sir. I'm asking you, what you said is, once somebody clears this certain hurdle, I have to do this, whether I want to or not. What I'm saying is, what is the thing that would allow you to, this isn't the right term of art, but to claw back that purchase? What do you need at either the state or federal level to be able to do that? Is the question not making sense?
Well,
No,
in
I
all
understand
due respect, Representative, they can deny purchase at any point in time. It can be a gut feeling. There are gun shops that have up to 1,000 people that say do not sell on there, and it could be just a gut feeling that this is not the right person to sell to. So
I cannot deny a sale based on membership in a protected class. That means that if I deny a sale to someone and they come at me and say, you denied this sale because I'm a member of a protected class, I have a huge problem. We do have absolute discretion to deny a sale to somebody that we suspect could be harmful to themselves or somebody else. In fact, last summer, a Sun-Times reporter who has a history of alcoholism and spousal abuse attempted to buy a rifle. We identified him and declined the sale.
Okay, but so that's not a protected class. So let's just be blunt here, since we keep bringing up this word as a shield. Are you saying I can't deny a sale because someone is black or gay, or what are we saying here?
If that charge can be made, I exist in legal peril.
Okay, so I understand that. So are we saying that the only time you've had an inkling you shouldn't sell someone a gun is because they were black or gay or protected class? Because if not, I don't understand what you're saying.
No, I didn't say that at all.
So I'm not. So that's why I'm asking the question, because I don't understand. Right? You're saying I can't deny a sale if someone could accuse me because they're a member of a protected class, I can't deny that sale. Give me a real world scenario of that happening.
We deny a sale to somebody who's a member of a protected class, pick one. They decide that it's because they're a member of a protected class that we denied the sale.
Okay, so let me use an example. I'm going to pick on Todd. So you have a suspicion that maybe Todd's a dangerous character. It's more than a suspicion, by the way. And you don't want to sell him, I'm just kidding, Todd. And you don't want to sell him a gun. So there's no problem with you not doing that because Todd is a white male? I don't understand.
That's the way, unfortunately, that the laws exist with respect to protected classes.
Okay.
Todd doesn't have standing as a member of a protected class.
So to be extraordinarily clear, what you're saying is you could potentially, at the point of sale, sort of lower the incidence of potential straw buyers if you could, I'm going to use this word knowing it's not quite what you mean, discriminate based on someone being in a protected class. Because that's what it sounds like you're saying.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
I'm really not trying to do ring around the rosy, but this
Right.
seems to be a crucial point.
With all due respect, all
are
you're
you
saying
Because it sounds, you said Todd's not a member of that class, and so therefore it doesn't apply to him. I, for example, would be. So I'm not trying to sort of get you in trouble here, but are you saying that like if you could sort of do an eyeball test, and if somebody was in a protected class and you suspected that they might potentially be a straw buyer, if you wouldn't be liable for not doing that, you could stop straw purchases at the point of sale? Because that's news.
No, I can't. No amount of training is going to turn me or my staff into mind readers. Straw buyers come in every shape and size. The woman I referred to in Mount Prospect was a 24-year-old Caucasian woman. There is no typical straw buyer.
Okay, I just, and I appreciate you saying that. I wanted to clarify that because if that was the case, that would be sort of an interesting thing that had not been heard before. I'm done. I will just sort of end by saying again, I think that this is a reasonable regulation in an industry that is reasonably profitable. If there is data that says for some reason this is going to be extraordinarily harmful to small businesses, we need to see that. But right now it's anecdotal. And sort of the stakes on the other side are, I've got kids who are literally dying, and there are things that we can do at the point of sale to make that less likely. That is not to run anybody out of business. Again, I've tried to be as reasonable on this topic as I can, but I think this is regulation that is needed, that will save lives, and I thank the sponsor for bringing it forward. Any way we can make it better, I think we're all open to, but I think it's necessary. Thank you.
Representative, to answer your question that you opened with, under the ATF trace data for 2014, time to crime for Illinois guns was 13 years on average. According to the Sources in Gun Crimes in Chicago study that's been cited here, they cite in Chicago the time of 12.6 years. So is that good enough for documenting my statement?
Yes, I think so. I wanted to clarify just because we had a couple different numbers floating around, but would still love that data on sort of run revenues. Thank you.
And I've seen both numbers. I chose the lower.
Appreciate it.